Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Hi. My name's Edgar Doby. I'm the executive producer here at Arena Stage, and I would just like to say a few words just to welcome you all. This is a first outing with our new neighbor, Politics and Prose, across the street. We've got our feet wet with a couple of smaller events, but we're really very happy to have you here at Arena Stage. I live in Southwest. I couldn't be happier that there's now a Politics and Prose just across the street from us here. I live in Southwest, as I said. I've changed my migration route every day to work. I go right by their storefront and take a look at what's on offer. And I've already picked up my copy of Tim O'Brien's America Fantastica. I just had a chance to have a few words with him backstage. And I think you're in for a really terrific conversation. And this is his first stop on a tour, so it already sounds like an actor to me, getting ready, getting all genned up for his tour across this country. And you're going to be seeing him on places like MSNBC as well. So I'm going to get out of the way, but before I do that, I wanted to thank Alyssa Martinez and Alan Watke, who are the folks from Politics and Prose that have helped put this evening together. And Alan is going to come out and make some more introductions, remarks now, so please give him a round of applause.
Thank you, Edgar. I appreciate that. I'm Alan Watke. I'm the Director of Events at Politics and Prose. And we are delighted to join Arena Stage as a partner for this event to bring you Tim O'Brien for America Fantastica. And it's his first novel in 20 years. So it's amazing to have him here for this. Before we get started, I just want to ask everyone to silence your cell phones and let you know that when we get to the audience Q&A, we have a mic set up right over here, so just line up at the mic and speak clearly into the microphone. And then once the event concludes, we are going to have a signing afterwards, and that's going to be back down at the entrance. So yeah, that's everything. Without further ado, I'm very excited to welcome Tim O'Brien, celebrating the long-awaited launch of America Fantastica. What New York Times calls a manic road trip meets crime spree novel, and Kirkus Reviews has called a broadly engaging and entertaining work. Tim O'Brien received the 1979 National Book Award, and among his books, obviously, is the much celebrated The Things They Carried, Pulitzer finalist, and New York Times Book of the Century, and in the Lake of the Woods, winner of the James Fenimore Cooper Prize, and he was awarded the Pritzker Literature Award for Lifetime Achievement in Military Writing in 2013. O'Brien will be joined in conversation with Clay Smith, the literary director of the Library of Congress. The office at the library that he directs, Literary Initiatives, curates the National Book Festival and oversees the library's literacy ambassadorships, such as the United States Poet Laureate and the National Ambassador for the Young People's Literature, among others. He's a former editor-in-chief at Kirkus Reviews and the literary director of the Texas Book Festival and the San Antonio Book Festival. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming to the stage Tim O'Brien and Clay Smith.
Hi. I'm delighted to be on stage with you. Much more delighted than in the green room because I don't know if you saw, but back there's one of those foam rollers in the green room, and I thought, should I be stretching before this literary conversation with Tim O'Brien? And there was also a sign that said, always, in all caps, always call 911 for life and limb emergencies. And I thought, So like, I'm glad to be here where,
Pleasure.
no emergencies. So the novel is out tomorrow. I'm guessing, most everybody hasn't read it yet. Do you want to tell us how you describe it?
I describe it as a serious novel wrapped up in kind of Jonathan Swift, bitter, nasty satire about the world that we have been living in since 2016 or so.
Yeah, we can date it to a specific moment, I think. Yeah. So I'd looked in the press release. It has been 20 years since your previous novel was published. Had you really been sort of thinking about this all that time? Because I mean, as you said, it's the novel feels very of the moment to me. You're talking about conspiracy theory, and you're thinking about what lies are and what the truth is. And our culture has taken a turn towards those topics, more recently. But you've been thinking about the novel for a long time, right?
I've been thinking about it not as a writer so much, but as a citizen of the country. That I've been getting increasingly in my old age frustrated with calling airlines, banks, AT&T, and being told that our lines are unusually busy. Listen to the flute music for the next 40 minutes. And they're not unusually busy. They're always busy. Every time you call these places, there's never an exception. It's a lie. But it's a lie we've all come to accept and live with somehow without even calling it a lie. So I tried to go after this in a funny sort of way through the idea that occurred to me maybe 20 years ago of a psychiatrist friend of me had talked about a psychological psychiatric disease called pseudologia fantastica, which is also known as mythomania, which is also known as compulsive lying. And I thought that one way of striking back at lying would be to write a kind of funny book about it. If you can't beat it with rationality, as we can't, I mean, try being rational. All you have to do is turn on the Fox channel or CNN, and against a certain kind of American, rationality is irrelevant. Things are just on faith. So we can laugh at it and have fun with it. Jonathan Swift had written this wonderful essay I read back in college called A Modest Proposal. And his solution to famine in Ireland was, let's eat our children. It's cheaper. You don't have to buy them. You've already had them. Lots of protein. Fresh protein, by the way. It's not the packaged kind that you find in a supermarket, Oscar Mayer style. It's good fresh meat. Well, it's a funny response to a real problem, because the most preposterous solutions were being offered at the time for solving famine. That essay struck a writer's note in me, as did the latter Mark Twain, kind of the embittered Mark Twain, where he went after the pious, hypocritical elements of American society in a way that was really angry, and yet funny to read simultaneously. And to wrap up fury with humor seemed to me the best response to the world I was living in as I yelled at my TV every night.
And well, I mean, that's so interesting because, you mentioned 2016, and I think a lot of people sort of date that year for a sort of a decided turn in the political conversation in this country. But you were thinking about things way, way before Trump, about, calling a corporation and being told that it's 40 minutes until you can talk to someone is a major annoyance, and it's a little lie. But there's a lot of those in American culture, and probably in other countries too. Now, let's not just blame it on America. But those little eyes sort of add up, right? And it starts to make life odd, right? That feels to me like the germ of the novel instead of necessarily Trump.
Yeah, there were kind of two germs. 20 years ago, I started this novel, 21 years ago, and abandoned it after, 30 pages or so, not very far into it. I was already thinking about, there's a quote from that is in the book, the epigraph, one of the two epigraphs. One is from Yeats. We had fed the heart on fantasy. The heart's grown brutal from the fair. And that quote has resonated in me for years and years and years. And it struck me that we both need fantasy. We need the world of make-believe as a way of getting through the world, the fantasy that tomorrow will be better than today. Even though all the odds may look grim, that we have to live that way. The life after death fantasy, that somehow I'll live on through my children, or I'll live on through my writing, in my case, or I'll live on through my good deeds as a citizen of the world. And one way or another, I can at least approach a kind of immortality. And those fantasies, I think, are necessary to keep us going. If we don't believe tomorrow will be better than today, why wait around for tomorrow? And that's the situation in which my main character finds himself. He finds himself in a situation early in the story, right, page 5 or 8, somewhere in there. He's a manager of a JCPenney store in Northern California. Life is grim. All he has to look forward to is rayon, a martini, at the country club afterward, maybe sinking a putt on the golf course, and dressing up in a clown suit on crazy days to sell more rayon. And on the opening of the book, he doesn't even decide, he just does it. He leaves his Kiwanis Club meeting at noon and crosses the street on a Saturday and goes up to the bank teller in a bank in Northern California and says how much money is on hand. And the young, flirtatious teller says, "Are you robbing me?" And he shows her a gun and says, "Not you," meaning the bank, and then asks her to take a ride with him afterward. And the rest of the novel is a kind of a road trip, kind of running from the bank robbery, but running through America as we've all lived through it, running through COVID and masks, running through talk radio with the strange, preposterous lies coming out of that radio from certain stations all across, especially the center of this country, the sort of heart of this country. Lies that are preposterous but believed anyway. So it's a journey through, for me at least, through the last several years of the life I've lived. But for me, in a way, one I'd find myself laughing at. That, and as you'll see when you read the book, it's I have fun with it.
Well, so tell us more about Boyd Halverson, the protagonist, because that's exactly how the novel starts, with him robbing the bank. You start things off with a real bang. But he has a history that's really quite interesting. He grew up poor in Santa Monica, interesting place to grow up without money. And becomes a really talented journalist, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how journalist, if there's any first definition of being a journalist, is to tell the truth, right?
Mm-hmm.
And he has a little problem with that.
Yeah, he's the Johnny Appleseed of compulsive liars, or so he calls himself. He makes Trump look like a he's the prince of the Sunday school. He's lied about everything throughout his entire life, including to himself. He's lied about his age, his height, where he went to college, what he eats, how much he can bench press. You name it, the fellow cannot tell the truth about anything. For him, as for a lot of Americans, reality is a monster. It's intolerable. For those who make up lies about themselves and about the world they live in, there's something intolerable to them about the real world that we're living in. They need to find something to replace maybe their own circumstances, their own politics, their own outcomes and social outcomes, their own idea of what America is or should be. I'm talking about MAGA America, make America great again. But what do they want to go back to? What's the reality? They want to go back to the Depression, the World War II, the world killing everybody else. They want to go back to the Civil War, the Red Scare. Where do they want to deposit themselves? Is it the Ozzie and Harriet America of the 1950s, which was also the era of McCarthyism, blackballing in Hollywood, actors, directors, writers? Is that what they want to go back to? Where do you want to go back? You want to go back to Vietnam, that era, my era? I wouldn't. So this idea of pressing back against reality, the realities of the world around us with fairy tales, is one kind of response, a psychological response to the world we live in. Unfortunately, right now, what I feel I'm doing is I'm a novelist, and I'm talking basically a mixture of sort of psychiatry and politics and social criticism, which is the opposite of what a novelist does. The sort of thing I'm doing right now is death sentence to a novelist. The story is everything. So the second thing I wanted to say about beginning was it began really with two characters, my fellow Boyd, who can't tell the truth about anything, and the teller, a nonstop motor mouth, a Pentecostal believer, and at the same time, a believer in bigamy and doing whatever she wants to do, and finds justifications for it. She was so beguiling 21 years ago when I started this, I couldn't get her out of my head. She's a diminutive redhead named Angie Bing. And I guess I kind of fell in love with her 21 years ago. I could not get her out of my head. I wanted to know her. And so she yapped at me for 21 years as I raised two kids. And I'd sit at the dinner table with my children and my wife, and I'd be hearing Angie just yapping away about how you got to stop lying, you got to stop drinking, you sure as hell got to stop smoking. Over and over, she was just berating me about my smoking in my head. And that's how I lived those 21 years. She said, write about me. I'm cute, I'm smart, I'm a missionary, I want to save you and the world, and I can do it. So write the damn sentences. And finally, when my kids got old enough, one is in college, the other is a senior in high school now, I was able to devote the time to getting to know Angie better.
Well, she's, the sort of freshness that you described when you first thought of her, it comes across in the novel, even though it's published 20 years later. She's a wonderful character. So one of the traits that she has in the novel is that she talks and she talks and she talks and she talks. How did you keep her sort of endearing? Because it very much comes across in the book that you, well, first of all, it comes across in the book that it seems like you've had a lot of fun writing this novel. And secondly, that of all the characters, you have a soft spot for Angie.
Yeah, she made herself endearing. I didn't really do it. She would say things like, do you want to hear a story about how I won my first gymnastics trophy? And so she tells an elaborate story about how she went to the state finals as a high school student and Redding, California. Did great and everything except the horse, but the horse I really screwed up. And then I had to wait for the final contestant. The final contestant, she calls Miss Horse. She just didn't miss anything. Great landing, great takeoff, great everything. I don't know much about gymnastics, but I made it sound good, like I did. And it goes on and on. So I got into the locker room. I'd lost the competition to her. And I saw the trophy sitting on a locker room bench, so I took it and put it in my gym bag and went out to the bus. And Boyd says, why are you telling me this? She says, be patient. This is after 3 pages of talking about this. Boyd's been patient, so was the reader. So she said, anyway, I went to Chico State, and I got my degree in business administration out of college, and went to my first interview up in Fulda, California, a make-believe town where most of this novel is set, or a lot of the novel. I went into the bank for my interview, and guess who I saw? And he says, Miss Horse, the one who would beat her in the gymnastics? He said, no, that's too coincidental. That's impossible. That's where I first saw you, when we started flirting. It's how we met. And he said, why do you need the rest of the story? Why didn't you just say we met in the bank? Well, that to me is beguiling, and I think all of us have run into people like that. They tell a long story to get to an obvious point. Well, how can you not love her?
So do you ever have characters who come to you who don't make the cut to the finished page for whatever reason? I mean, I'm thinking of this because on Saturday at the Library of Congress we did a big children's event called Family Mystery Day, and we had Jerry Spinelli, who is a legendary children's writer. He wrote Stargirl, among many other titles, and I've attended a lot of book events during my time, and he talked about, you know, he sort of goes on a date with the character who comes to him. He interviews them, they go to lunch, and they talk to one another. And I'm not a big believer in like the woo-woo, you know, sort of spiritual side of writing character, but do you have characters who come to you and don't make the cut, and why is that?
Yeah, I'd say probably, I don't know, a quarter of them or so. It happened, I get rid of them usually by killing them early on the page, or killing them in my thoughts by simply hitting the delete button on my computer. In the old days, it was harder with a typewriter to get rid of characters. Technology's helped. You used to have to rewrite them out of the book by typing them in. Now you can hit delete and then do the rewriting.
The union of fictional characters is
Right.
You're going to get such a nasty letter from me.
But yeah, I do.
So, okay, so we have Boyd, who is a journalist, or former journalist, and yet a compulsive liar. Angie, who is a Pentecostal woman who's a bank teller who finds ways to get around faith and God. And there's Angie's boyfriend. There's a lot of sort of like rough characters in this novel. Tell us a little bit about them.
Yeah, there's a guy named Randy Zapp, to whom Angie is, he's her fiance. I'm not sure if they're actually engaged or not, but when she is kidnapped from the bank and taken to just take this drive around America with $81,000, she's sending postcards back to her boyfriend while she's also made herself engaged to Boyd. She sort of said, you're my other second fiance. She has 3 or 4 of them. And she views herself, I think I said this a bit earlier, she views herself as a missionary in the good sense. That is, she really believes that she can save people's souls through talk. Just don't stop talking till your soul is saved and let me know when it happens. And she believes in it. Randy is one of my favorite characters in the book. He's a nasty dude. He's also a doofus. he's stupid as dirt, but thinks he's really smart and acts that way. So he sort of impresses me with his confidence that I wish I had his confidence about writing or about anything else. He is a rodeo cowboy, but a part-time burglar, full-time lover of cars, but his favorite car is an old Cutlass he drives. So, for example, he gets stopped by a cop in North Dakota at one point in the book in his Cutlass, which has just lost its toll transmission, barely moves. And he challenges the to a race after getting his ticket. He's also a murderer. We watch him stuff a buffing rag down a shoe salesman's throat in a kind of nice, sort of loving way, but murderous simultaneously. And like any character, I'm as a writer, I'm attracted to contradiction. There's a line in Robert Graves' poem called "The Devil's Advice to Storytellers." The line is, "Nice contradiction between fact and fact makes the whole read human and exact." And I believe in that because I think the human character is full of contradictions. Part of me loves Randy, part of me despises him. And it goes back and forth by the second. That to me is an interesting character. I'm not interested in villains who are totally villainous, nor am I interested in saints who are totally saintly. I'm interested in human beings who are a mixture of all that and more. And that's why the villains in this story, he's only one of, as Clay said, one of several, intrigue me. They intrigue me on television, too, I might add. I'm going back to CNN, Fox, and all the news stuff I've watched. I tried to put myself on a diet, and like all diets, like I fell off of it almost immediately. I was doing it in my room right before coming here. But the contradictions in human character really appeal to me, and they always have, even before I was a writer.
So you choose, I think it's 4 small towns in America to be these kind of, almost like these places that are kind of like factories of lies. Towns where people are making up tweets and they'll just make up the most outrageous thing. First of all, what did those towns ever do to you? So tell us about this idea of, lies come from a particular place, and that, because you have these scenes where people get together to make up these lies, and they think they're just having a lot of fun.
Yeah, I'm sort of playing off chat rooms and conspiracy room chat rooms that I made up the thing called truth seeds all across America, in Spirit Lake, Iowa, Fulda, California, I don't know, Bemidji, Minnesota. There are these things where people come up with preposterous lies, sort of in competition with others. And one of the fun things, there were many fun things in writing this book, but was making up lies that were more preposterous, ludicrous, and funny than those I would see on the chat rooms. I'd go investigate them. It was hard to beat them. I made up a honeymooning couple who honeymooned aboard a sunken Soviet submarine off Block Island, and how the caviar was still almost as good as new in the skeletal crew from this, and how they came all out at the end of the honeymoon and then broadcast this as fact. And as ludicrous and preposterous it is, things like that beat it in the real world. I did my best to make them funny and weird. Not sure I succeeded. One of the lies is that of the American presidents, this is one that I guess is probably my favorite. Of all the American presidents, 16 never existed. They were all B-level actors. I mean, Benjamin Harrison, a nobody, literally. Polk, another nobody, literally, all invented, totally made up, and
Don't
never
forget
were.
Millard Fillmore.
And based on what a lot of Americans know about American history, they might swallow it. Like, maybe there was no Benjamin Harrison. I don't sure know a damn thing about him. Playing off the ignorance of fact and ignorance of history and ignorance of reality is fun, but unfortunately it's extremely dangerous, especially when it starts undermining democracy, constitutional democracy. Then it gets, when you start hurting other people with your lies, then it gets bad and dangerous, and that's what happened in this book.
But there are other places that you sort of inhabit more fully. I mean, there's Santa Monica, there's Texas, your home state, both sides of the state, from west to east. Minnesota. How did you, why those spots?
Well, I picked places I knew with a road trip as I'm running after this bank robbery for a full year that I was familiar with. I live in Texas, and don't blame me, I just lived there. But I was familiar with Port Aransas, that area.
It's on the Gulf Coast.
Yeah, on the Gulf Coast. And my two heroes and my hero and heroine run into they're looking for somebody, and they run into a guy with Gulf Vet written on his hat. And he explains this. He gets challenged by Boyd, were you in the Gulf War? The guy said, no, but I've lived here in the Gulf for 56 years, and I'm a Gulf vet. And Boyd takes out the pistol, which he'd first brandished at the bank robbery, and shoots the guy's table just for fun, and leaves. In the course of this conversation, Angie decides that they've become engaged through the shooting of the table, which she thinks was done to defend her honor in front of this guy who was trying to flirt with her in front of her so-called fiancé, Boyd. You got to read it. This is too hard. To paraphrase a book that's a novel is ridiculous. I mean, it's just a stupid thing to be doing. But it's also exciting to me because I did love writing it so much. I haven't enjoyed writing a book since I started writing my first book. And 10 pages later, it was frustrating. And is it any good? Why do I have to revise again and again and again? It was agony, and it has been agony. And although this book was hard to write and took 5 years, it was fun. I mean, I did enjoy inhabiting Randy as you would put a buffing rag down a shoe salesman. I liked being that guy. Randy's idea of heroism is to become Charles Manson. He wants to go to prison for murder. He wants to end up in the prison, Corcoran State Prison, where Manson ended up. He wants to beat the champ as a murderer. And I was that guy as I wrote those sections. I sort of wanted what he wanted. And that's fun, when you inhabit a character that's not yourself, that's so alien from the person I am.
Well, I mean, the novel was sort of fun to write. Your previous ones maybe not so fun. How do you think of this novel in relation to your previous work? So many readers know you from The Things They Carried and Going After Cacciato. Not that there has to be one, but is there a relationship between this novel and the previous ones?
Well, there's one big one. My subject has always been America. I mean, even the Vietnam books are about American soldiers and what they bring to the war and what they bring home from the war. And this book is about America. It was praised recently in a review for its cynicism. But I don't view the book as cynical at all about my country or about the characters. I view it as wide-eyed and open and responding to what I witness around me, but not cynical. Simply, I feel like I'm in a way holding up a mirror to what I've witnessed around me and then trying to exaggerate it through humor. And and yet a mirror of what I see around me, but in no way cynical. And that is throughout my work has been, I try to portray American soldiers in those earlier books as you and me and other soldiers I knew there, some of whom were wicked, some of whom were wonderful and brave, some of whom were noble, some of whom were just the opposite of noble, but the full array of the characters that I have met through my life and in Vietnam. So that strain runs through it all. There are also certain image things that I try to do in every book to refrain something from an earlier book. So at the end of the things they carried, there's this very, very last page of the book. The Timmy character is ice skating with a dead little girl. She's in his imagination at night under yellow spotlights in a small town on a pond. And he takes a high leap into the dark and then comes bound as Tim, the grown-up writer. And there's a part of that where he writes that when he looks back on the past, it's as if he's looking through ice at the person you used to be, that little boy or that little girl. And they're fuzzy, but they're there. And that image is picked up in the new book with an image of Boyd. He and Angie encounter a guy in Minnesota, very much like Boyd, a liar, but much younger. And Boyd sees him, this guy's committed suicide by, in the middle of the winter, going out with a ice auger and digging a hole in the ice on a lake. And Boyd sees this red parka under the ice. The image of this man he'd known through 80, 90, 100 pages of this book. And so images strike me and stay with me. The shooting of water buffalo stayed with me through 3 books. That was a real thing I witnessed in Vietnam, where we'd had a couple of guys wounded and one killed on a morning. And in the afternoon, my company was walking through a rice paddy, and off to the right, there was just this water buffalo, maybe 50 yards away. And one guy began shooting at it, and then other guys, and then all of us just unloading on this water buffalo. And how long it took to die. I mean, you could see gobs of flesh jumping off the buffalo's hide. And you could see it stagger to a knee and try to get up, and repetitively. And this is 100 guys, most of whom could shoot straight. And that buffalo took a long time to fall down. And it struck me as more hideous and profane and telling about the frustration and the anger and all the emotions that war engenders in the human spirit, and taking it out on an innocent animal. And that was more of a war crime to me than lots of other stuff I witnessed in Vietnam. And it stuck with me, so I've used that image in many books. And I'd say I have maybe 10 or 15 things that I try to just repeat as a way of giving a connectivity to my work.
Yeah. Let's say, acknowledge that a novelist can write about anything they want to. But, there's been so many articles and think pieces about the rise in conspiracy thinking in America and books. I mean, we had a session about this at the National Book Festival last year. The rise of conspiracy thinking, or sort of mythomania, as you call it in this novel, what can a novelist bring to that topic that a nonfiction writer can't?
You can bring story to it. As a fiction writer, I depend on story. I depend on this causes this, causes this, causes this. Boyd robs a bank for a reason. What's the reason? Entertainment. I'm bored. But there's a deeper reason that he's fed up with life. He wants to somehow or another end his life. And so you watch this unfold. You don't know this till like 300 pages into the book. But you depend on story as a way of, the human being needs to be entertained. That without it, especially in this day and age, the rational capacity doesn't work. You can't argue a conspiracy theorist out of his conspiracy theory. You can't debate him. He's not going to concede. It's implanted. And it's so antithetical to how I was, grown up, going to college and believing in the power of the rational. And there's a line from Socrates that together we might discover the most perfect truth. That somehow that edge is left. There's no desire to discover the most perfect truth going on here in Washington in the Congress. You think that's what they're talking about? The most perfect truth? It's not even talked about. And so why not respond as Swift and Twain did? At least you can strike back. I don't like being laughed at. I like being laughed with, but I don't like being laughed at. And maybe that's the kind of revenge. Let's laugh at the fuckers.
Well, I mean, you're right, because one of the things that I love about this novel is the way that in any one chapter you weave in these different narratives in the way that you could watch, a really well-constructed Hollywood movie. You get one person's story, and then at the exact same time you see what the other person is doing. And you do that within chapters. And that seems like it was fun for you because you have a very nice, I guess we call them transitions. You just go from one story to the next. How do you sort of map that out? Are you an outliner? Do you sort of go with where the character leads you, or?
It's a great question. I think it maps itself out. It feels that way. I don't plan beyond usually the next sentence. And sentence leads to paragraph. And out of that, it might be a scrap of dialogue or a description. Something occurs to bring me to the next step. So it feels as if I'm writing the sentences, but out of them comes the next sentence and the next event, the next bit of dialogue, the next turn of the novel. And if I were to outline, I wouldn't write because I'd already know where it's going. It wouldn't be an adventure for me as a writer. And so I'm trusting that the story will present itself. Sometimes there are forks in the road that do baffle me, that an event could go somewhere or it could go elsewhere. And what you do is you do what a swimmer does. You dive in and try it out. That goes back to one of your earlier questions. Do you ever rid yourself of characters? And that's kind of where the ridding will happen, the deletion of a character. You dive into the wrong lake or the wrong part of the same lake. And then you have to drag yourself out and dive in elsewhere. But I do trust in the I call it waking dreaming, that you're awake, but you're dreaming the events. And you're dreaming virtually everything as you do it. I have a habit of writing. I get up really early in the morning. I've done this now for since I started writing again, about 2 in the morning. And I do the dishes left over from the night before. And during that early morning hours, the world is asleep around me. My family's asleep. And I'm a little groggy. And as I'm doing the dishes, little bumblebees of memory go through my head. They'll flip through a picture of my high school English teacher, or something from a tile guy setting tile. It'll be something that jumps through my head. And now and then, one of these bumblebees follows me into my office, where it sticks around and sort of irritates me. And whatever that bit of memory is that's flicking through there finds its way into the story, helps propel the story forward. I think that most writers of fiction operate kind of that way. I don't think they're using that causal chain sort of thing that we would use in ordinary talk. They're using a dream world that inserts itself without your willpower or your volition. So when cool bits of language that I think are good, they're graceful and new, but they have an edge, occur to me that I'm not making them up. The bumblebee is making up the language for me. Some of the best dialogue that I've written is just delivered to me.
Oh, that's great. So last question for me, and then we'll have you all ask some questions. And again, as a reminder, the mic stand is just over there. I imagine your editor is the most patient person on the planet. Like, after waiting this long, did he say, okay, you have exactly 1 year to turn in your next novel after this one? Do you have a deadline a year from now, or?
What novel?
Do I have to do this again?
No, I've got bad carpal tunnel. I mean, really, really, really bad. And I'm old. And writing is a lonely thing. And at my age, I'd rather be with my kids. And I'm not going to see much of them anyway while they're at college. Maybe I'll go live with them on campus or something. And I don't know what I'm going to do about that, but somehow I'll find
That's
a way.
a premise for a novel right there. Novelist
My
stops
older
writing.
kid right now is over, he's taking his junior year abroad at the London School of Economics. And I've been looking into prices for tickets over to London lately.
Nice. Okay, what questions do you all have? Does anybody want to go to the mic? Okay, we've got one guy here. Our brave first question asker.
Thanks, and thank you for coming. Really appreciate this. I was just looking at the beginning of the book, and I noticed early on your character, of the things he brings with him, is he brings a copy of the Iliad, which I'm ashamed to say I'm only reading for the first time right now, and I find it really disturbing. And I'm wondering what sort of play the Iliad has had in your own life as a soldier, former soldier, but also why it's in this book. Is it going to play out as something else, something bigger maybe?
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, he's wondering, in the novel, Boyd has a copy of the Iliad with him, and what has the Iliad meant in your life, in your writing life, and especially for you as a soldier?
Yeah, that's a great question. The Iliad appears maybe 5 times in the book, including at the end. There's a tug of war, a moral tug of war, going between Angie and Boyd. She's trying to make him a believer in heaven and hell and harps and real pearly gates, a literal kind of Sunday school interpretation of what God is and what the afterlife is. And Boyd is skeptical of this. He said, why can't you simply believe in oblivion? You came from oblivion. You don't remember anything, so you have an experience that you can base it on, that you don't remember a thing. Why isn't it likely that you're going to go back to oblivion? Why do you have to posit something for which you have no evidence? So there's this moral tug of war throughout the book. And she's claiming, well, you don't have to experience. All you need is what Martin Luther said. You need faith and nothing else. If you have faith, there will be a heaven and everlasting life, and if you don't, there won't be. And so this goes on, not in this kind of precise language that I'm kind of formalizing now. And at the end of the book, Boyd said, you know, I'm not an atheist. I'm a pantheist. I'm a believer in the Greek and Roman gods, more or less. They hold a convention in the Cow Palace every billion years, and they elect a new Poseidon and a new Athena. The old Athena now works in a Dillard's selling cosmetics. I can't remember what the old Poseidon is doing, but like sells life insurance for State Farm. And they retire every couple billion years. So it's the Iliad figures in this tug of war, sort of pantheist versus a very strict Pentecostal Christian. And it's in the book for a reason. It has to do with issues of what's true. What is a lie? Are there kinds of lies? White lies, are they okay? Lying to yourself, is that okay? Is it lying when you've sort of fancied a better life for yourself? And it goes sort of from the most modest human sorts of things that we tell ourselves, what's true? I remember walking through Vietnam, like thinking, who am I? I mean, I thought I was a peace-loving, didn't know a thing about guns kind of kid. Now I'm over here killing people. Well, am I the Tim O'Brien I thought I was? What's true now may not have been true in, say, 1950. Or what's true now that it's like almost, say, 9 o'clock isn't true in Tokyo, is it? Or in Fiji or on Neptune. People change their minds. What was true on Saturday may not be true on Sunday. I love her. Oh, I don't anymore. Someplace something switched, or on Thursday, let's say. So minds change. Truth does not float around where you can touch it and say, the sun doesn't say, hey, I'm the center of the universe, or I'm the center of the solar system. It doesn't speak. Humans do that. We make declarations about what's true and what's false. So the Iliad plays into this idea of how do we know what truth is? It's fluid, it's mutable, it changes over time. The world was once flat. Now we think otherwise, rightfully. So the Iliad was my sort of touchstone on this religious tug of war going on, but it went deeper than that for me. It goes throughout the whole book. The lies that people tell can tickle their tongues and their tonsils and their teeth. They can tickle. There's something thrilling about my characters, about issuance of a lie. And I think it's not just contemporary. I think it goes way beyond the contemporary world we live in. I think it goes to human nature. We're trapped in reality, and we sometimes need fantasy to get out of what can feel like a trap. At 3 in the morning, and your wife has left you, and you've lost your job, and you're lying in bed talking to yourself. You might need a fantasy to keep going. So it's a way of getting into that.
Are you reading the new Emily Wilson translation? Oh, okay.
Now go to somebody good.
Okay.
As a former high school English teacher, I taught your book, The Things They Carry, and I'm curious what you would recommend for high schoolers to read now in terms of books for authors, if you have any.
Good. Why don't you repeat it for
Yeah,
me?
just she is a high school teacher and taught The Things They Carried, and is wondering what Tim would recommend for high school students to read nowadays.
I've recently reread a really wonderful Turgenev novel called First Love. It's about a guy. High school students would really like it. It's short, number one, which almost has to be. But it's about a guy who falls in love, a 20-something-year-old guy who falls in love with a girl and discovers about midway or a little more than midway through this very short novel that his father has been sleeping with the girl he's in love with, his own father. and about the turmoil that this causes, that a sense of betrayal by father, the girl, it's complicated, rich, it's its own kind of internal tug of war, and beautifully written, and wholly believable. That as kind of gross as the subject is, it's an extremely gripping story. So I'd recommend it. I don't know how long books can be physically before you can teach them in a high school. I doubt you could do War and Peace or remembrances of things past. I mean, you could get like 10 pages maybe in, but not much. My kids, both of them, loved Catcher in the Rye. I fear that it's not long exactly, but it's not short either. But I fear your school boards might have trouble with it. But give it a shot and see if they go with it. I don't know what else to say. I mean, there are so many books I love. I mean, Fitzgerald, I teach Great Gatsby any day. I just loved it. I loved even more Tender as the Night, which again is longer, even more than Gatsby.
We have time for 2 more questions, and I
Okay.
think we have one right here.
Okay, great.
Yes, I will admit I haven't read America Fantastica yet. I just picked it up as I walked in. But I've read the things they carried probably 5, 6, maybe 7 times. I would say it's among the most influential books of my entire life, so I want to thank you for that. So in listening to you describe America Fantastic, you have this concept of truth and what is truth, and it sounds like you've created this totally fictional story around, or stories around that theme. Mm-hmm. For the things they carried, clearly there's a very strong autobiographical grounding to that. And you're telling stories to a great extent you lived. So I'm just wondering, from an author's perspective, what are your sensibilities in writing, when writing this book, as compared to writing things you actually lived and are more or less kind of walking that strange barrier between, or that boundary between fiction and nonfiction?
Well, I've always been interested in falsity and truth in all my books, even in the things they carried. Characters are challenging one another about, remember the Maryann Bell chapter, the woman who comes, a young high school girl, goes over, becomes a killer in Vietnam. Totally fabulous, never happened, and probably couldn't happen. But the person narrating that story was swearing to its truth. I was there, I saw her, she was real. A similar thing happened to that story was based on something that I went through in Vietnam. The guy told a story about a girl who showed up in the Song Trebong. It's a river that goes through northern central Vietnam. About a guy who flew in his girlfriend from Cleveland Heights, Ohio. Well, it was told to me. I didn't believe it. I said, no, it couldn't be true. You can't come over, fly your girlfriend into a war. So I come back to the States, and the book came out, and I was giving a reading somewhere, a talk, and somebody came up to me and said, I saw her. I was there. And so there's 2 people now that are swearing it's real. And I was still thinking it can't happen. And I started thinking, well, why don't I believe it? And there were hippies hitchhiking through that war from America. I mean, literally, going up and down Highway 1. Journalists, many of them women, Gloria Emerson. There were nurses in the hospitals. It wasn't as if you were a woman, you were exempt from being in Vietnam. You could go on vacation back then. If you fly to fly to Bangkok, and then to let anybody in from Bangkok into Vietnam. You could be from Neptune. So it was gender. that made me not believe, that made me interested in writing the story, that gender block alone makes you not believe something that can't happen. A woman wouldn't do such a thing. And to make such stereotypical choices about women, what they will or won't do, you're not living in the same universe that I had lived in through my whole life, where women pretty much determine, I'm going to do this, and then don't argue with me. So she was the same age as all the guys who were actually in Vietnam. She was full of the same romantic, bullshitty, naive ideas about killing people for peace than all my fellow soldiers were filled with. That there's a romanticism that surrounds going to war that's false, but romantic. It's what that, sweet and honorable is death for your country, that old line from Horace that Wilfred Owen goes after in that great poem of his. There's nothing sweet and honorable about it, but to people of 20 and 19 and 18, there's that adventurous, it's sweet and honorable to go off and die for your country. And there's nothing very sweet about it, that's for sure. Maybe honorable, but not sweet. And maybe not honorable either, especially when the cause is a bad one. So this line between, it's not just new to me, it goes back all the way through In the Lake of the Woods. That's the dominant theme of that book. What's real? What really happened? How do we know it's real? And it's always been just of interest to me. It's not a philosophical, I don't mean it intellectually, it's just been fascinating to me. Probably based on my own experience of finding myself over in that war as a befuddled and bewildered 20-year-old.
Do we have time for one more question, I think?
This question is really inspired by your having discussed yourself as a father and what your children read. I'm wondering how you, prominent author, react to what we've been seeing all over the country, which is librarians and having to put books off the shelves, having to not teach in schools things that your kids would have read and that my kids would have read. Mm-hmm. And what your response is to that. Maybe we need a novel about that.
I should repeat that.
So the question is just, he's wondering what, a prominent writer like Tim thinks about books that Tim grew up with being banned. What do you think about the banning sort of trend, I guess, in general?
I'm all in favor of it. The more times they ban the book, the more often you sell a book. I mean, it's disgusting, obviously, and it's a thing I can laugh at in a way that I keep coming back to what my early years. I remember seeing on TV in one of those black and white documentaries, the image in Nazi Germany of this big pier of burning books. It was, I saw it in like 8th grade in one of those documentaries they'll show you about World War II. And that image of those burning books seems so foul to me. And that's what comes to my head. That's a kind of visceral disgust at burning books.
Yeah. Okay, great. So we may not have gotten all the questions. You can follow Tim to the signing, ask him some questions there. But let's thank Tim for being here. This is his first stop on the tour.
Thank you.